Maybe I would start with a very short introduction about myself. I'm a sound artist and a curator, and I may say that I'm trying to curate through sound understandings, even though I don't always curate sound exhibitions. And a few years ago, I came across the beautiful Fluxus box of the catalog of John Cage's composition for museum called Rolly Wolly Over, 3 Silent Spaces, a Circus. And I was quite overwhelmed with the idea of a composer writing a score for an exhibition. And I was kind of like very interested of this idea of writing a score, a musical score. What does that even mean? And I was trying to find information about it, and there was none, because it was his very late project that was actually executed after his death. So I decided to do it myself. And this is a very early stage of my PhD, but I'm obsessively working with this project for quite a few years already. So let's start. In 1989, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, MoCA, invited the American composer and artist John Cage to create a new artwork based on his life. Cage, who wasn't interested in a show whose subject matter revolved around his autobiography, instead created a 4-movement composition for museum entitled Rolly Wolly Over, a Circus, which applied chance operation to the location and selection of artworks. The composition, as conceptualized by Cage, was executed after his death in 1992 by MoCA curator Julie Lazar, and traveled between 1993 and 1995 from Los Angeles to Houston, Philadelphia, New York, and Mito, Japan. While other artists have experimented with the form of the art exhibition, Cage's project constituted something new. He constructed his exhibition in a manner akin to his musical composition. This entailed, firstly, that Rolly Wolly Over was a performative event. Hundreds of artifacts, plants, rocks, and pieces of ephemera were subjected to a chance-derived computerized score in which the displayed objects were referred to only by number. In one of the movements, the main circus, visitors could see a computer printing out generated changes, which in turn were translated to works being hung on the walls and taken down during opening hours by gallery installers, as we see here, basically. In another movement, the museum circle, visitors could play chess, read books, and enjoy other lifelike experiences in the gallery. Secondly, as in Cage's musical compositions, background sounds intervened. Similar to 433 from 1952, where the audience was part of the silent experience, in Rolly Wolly Over, Cage empowered the visitors and the exhibition installers as performers. While they were dealing with a displayed object, moving chairs, playing chess, reading books, etc., they were adding sounds and themselves became part of the exposition. Moreover, it was the use of Cage's circus-like structure that ensured his exhibition was, instead of a conceptual object made by one person, a conceptual process that engulfed the spectators and made them unintentionally part of a group that set it in motion. As such, the structure of his composition for a museum can relate to what Richard Castellans defines in the theater of mixed means as pure happening, for it, quote, provides neither focus for one's attention nor sense of duration, and the performance envelopes the audience, end quote. This happening setting is much different from the other happenings made by Cage, such as the happening at Black Mountain College, and from what Castellans defines as stage happenings, in which the audience is separated from the performers. Moreover, by using a score, which included chant separation, as well as instruction to compose his exhibition, Cage applied the same ideas and methodology he used to compose his sound and later on his visual art. Accordingly, he allowed copies and replicas to be incorporated in his composition, following his understanding that in sound there is no such thing as an original note. Furthermore, the composer, who allowed notes to be themselves, treated objects in the same manner. While the participating institutions were listed in the accompanying box composition publication, the selected objects were not. No labels were placed beside the objects, though they were numbered, and an enumbered list of all the objects on display was available in the gallery. This label omission might be read as an agitative act, but according to Lazar, was decided by Cage together with key museum staff after realizing the extreme height at which some pieces were to be hung and the proximity of some hangings. According to Lazar, it was Cage's ongoing interest in collage, both in sound and visual art, that led him to situate art along with ephemera and non-art objects. She further argues that this, along with the desire to reject authorship, was the main impetus behind Rolly Wolly Over. Cage's composition for a museum followed the artist's research into the sign of silence, a key element that defines much of his practice, and as such, explored the meaning of space as emptiness or nothingness, as he himself suggested in a 1991 interview with the American poet and scholar Joan Retelach. An exhibition can dip into leaving a wall empty, and it's out of that emptiness and not being put off by nothing happening. And when you see it, it really impresses you that hearing the emptiness, becomes a possibility all over again. Through his engagement with the art exhibition, Cage extended his research into the spatial dimension, exploring the meaning of silence as an absence of the intentional rather than the absence of sound, as he did in his famous silence piece 433. But while 433 allowed the discovery of sound relationships, connecting them in time through memory, and processing these relationships as musical, Rolly Wolly Over blew open the temporal frame of the experience and added movement to the mix. In 1991, as part of his preparation for Rolly Wolly Over, Cage conducted 2 smaller-scale museum-related compositions. The first was Changing Installation at the Mattress Factory in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in collaboration with the Carnegie International. The second was one of Rolly Wolly Over's 4 movements, the Museum Circle, which was performed in Munich in 1991 at Staatsgalerie Moderne Kunst. According to Lazar, Museum Circle was informed by Errate Musicale from 1913, the first musical work of the French-American artist Marcel Duchamp, and as such demonstrate well the consequences of Cage's spatial adaptation of sound. In the spring of 2015, I juxtaposed Museum Circle and Errate Musicale in order to compare the performances of the 2 scores, and more specifically, to contemplate the consequences of Cage's spatial adaptation of sound composition principle. This project, entitled Image Coming Soon #1, was presented in Toronto at the Justina and Barnicky Gallery. And I would like now to share some insight from this project, and we'll start with a short introduction to Errate Musicale. Duchamp wrote Errate Musicale for 3 voices, his 2 sisters and himself, entitled each part after their names, Yvonne, Magdalene, Marcel. The 3 voices are written out separately, and there is no indication whether they should be performed individually or together as a trio. In composing this piece, Duchamp made 3 sets of 25 cards, 1 for each voice, with a single note per card. Each set of cards was then mixed in a hat. Then he drew the cards one at a time and wrote down the series of notes in the order in which they were drawn. Like his use of ready-mades, the words that accompany the musical notes were from a French dictionary's definition of imprint. Imprint, I'll spare you my French. Imprint, to make an imprint, mark with lines a figure on a surface, impress in seal in wax. Errate musicale is the first of only 3 musical compositions that Duchamp composed. All 3 sounds works are included in the Green Box, which Duchamp published in 1934 and considered part of his notes for The Bright Striped Bear by her bachelor's even, from 1915 to 1023, also known as the large glass. Errate musicale embodied the same ideas as other projects from 1913, such as the first ready-made, a bicycle wheel on a kitchen stool, throwing into question the concept of a work of art, and along with it, the declaration that it was the artist's power of selection and choice that turned any object into a work of art. In an interview Arturo Schwarz conducted with Duchamp for his book, The Complete Works of Marcel Duchamp from 1969, the artist reveals that the theory behind Errate musicale was owed to Lewis Carroll's guide for becoming a poet in Poeta fit non nascitur from 1869. For first, you write a sentence, and then you chop it small, then mix the bits and sort them out, just as they chance to fall. The order of the phrases makes no difference at all. The title of the Carroll's poem is a play on a Latin proverb, poeta nascitur non fit, which means a poet is born, not made. By inverting it, Carroll counters that a poet is made, not born. Duchamp takes it from there, and as he chops the notes and words for Errate musicale, he alters the concept and process of being a composer. Duchamp's musical work represent a radical departure from anything done up until that time in music, most notably because they showed that you did not need to be a composer to compose music. His 3 musical works are considered difficult material to work with, for there are very few comments or explanation by the artist to assist with resolving the pieces. The lack of instruction in Duchamp's musical score forces a process of interpretation. So basically in Image Camisung there were 2 rooms in the gallery, and in one of the rooms there was unannounced performances of Errate musicale, which the unannounced structure was part of Cage's instruction for a different movement in a Rolly Wolly Over. And in the other gallery, there was a museum circle, and the idea was to allow the spectator experience both the performance of both scores, and trying together to realize what does it mean to take a musical work and to do kind of a space adaptation of that. So now I will show you 2 very short excerpts of, we had a few trios that came when they wished to do it, and did performances of Errate musicale. And something totally different, just to show that the diversity of interpretation. This is Ido Govrin with 2 tapes. It's a trio. Yeah, so what I'm basically suggesting is that, according to Julie Lazar, that Museum Circle is Cage's interpretation of erratum musicale. So, following, this is about Museum Circle, about the movement that was in Rollover and was presented in my project, in Image Coming Soon, and the next following images would be from Image Coming Soon of Museum Circle. Following Duchamp's usage of found words from a dictionary, Cage created a pool of found objects from sending an open call to all public lending institutions: fine art, natural science, natural history, aerospace, anthropology, etc., within a radius of 30 miles from each host city, inviting them to submit a list of 10 objects from their collection. One object from each list was then selected according to a list of numbers created by Cage's computerized I Ching program named the IC. The list consists of 640 randomly repeating numbers between 1 and 10 and chosen by chance operations. The object from the museum's list is then selected according to the order of their arrival. For example, if the first item in the IC list is the number 2, then object number 2 is selected from the list of 10 objects that is first to arrive. If the second item in the IC list is the number 5, then object number 5 is selected from the list of objects that arrived second, and so on. These objects, together with scores, rocks, plants, shelves with reference books similar to those found in Cage's private library, chess tables, and pieces of ephemera, constitute the elements of Museum Circle. Again, following Duchamp's chance methodology for erratum musicale, each object was numbered, as was each potential placement in the spatial grid. These numbers were later pulled by the museum staff from 2 hats, or in fact cardboard boxes, one for the objects and the second for the spatial grid of the gallery. I would maintain that unlike Duchamp's composition, Cage's composition for museum did not aim to be provocative or critical regarding the institution of art, and accordingly, the spatial grid was conceived with utmost respect to the objects on display. For instance, objects were not to be hung too low where they might be mistakenly damaged, or hang upside down or backwards. But as mentioned before, there were no labels beside the works describing the artistic, chronological, political, biographical, or historical connection of the works on display. It was a space of free interpretation. In many ways, Rollover and the Museum Circle movement in particular was Cage's most ambitious and most successful project in achieving a critical break between the artist's ego and the work itself, a break previously described by Duchamp in the Creative Act from 1957. In this text, Duchamp describes the role of the spectator in the encounter with the work of art as the revival of the Creative Act, or what he called the art coefficient. In erratum musicale, the performer created his own interpretation of the musical score, which was later interpreted by the spectator as an abstract musical sculpture. In contrast, in Museum Circle, we witness Cage redefining the Creative Act, pushing at its limit via his interpretation of Duchamp's musical work. Cage created a spatial composition to be completed by the spectators, whose activities, such as moving chairs, opening drawers, playing chess, talking, and touching produced sounds and thereby became part of a musical experience. But what most revolutionary about Cage's composition for a museum is that apart from its structure, there is no narrative on display. This, I believe, reassociates curiosity in the framework of the art exhibition as a trophy of the spectator's personal research. So one of the instructions of Museum Circle was actually to include drawers with pieces of ephemera. There's no indication of which pieces of ephemera should be included. I decided to ask the Cage Trust to allow me to present archival material from the reproduction, from the actual production process of this, of Rolly Wolly Over, and they were generous enough to let me copy it, and people could actually like take it with them. So, and there was, I chose about 100 files, but there were 15 every day on display, and if you come more than once, you could come, bless you, you could come and collect more information, like the information was changing daily. This should be taken into consideration when thinking of the American philosopher Susan Buck Morse's conception of phantasmagoria, as she argues that under modernity, humankind is anestheticized not through the dullness of sensations, but rather by the flawedness of the senses, the result of which is a loss of the capacity for direct experience. But in Cage's composition, the potential for direct experience is created through the randomness and lack of rational order, which are facilitated by a series of chance operations. When Cage was asked by Moira and William Ruth about the differences between Duchamp's idea of chance and his own, he referred to errata musicale, saying that he wouldn't be satisfied with pulling notes out of a hat, but that he was delighted with it in Duchamp's work. As such, Cage indicated that he preferred his version of chance to be more intricate, but according to him, that wasn't the main difference in their perspectives. I think that the difference between our attitudes to chance probably came from the fact that he was involved with ideas through seeing, and I was involved through hearing. Cage goes on to define Duchamp's use of chance as a form of translation based in language, in contrast to his own goal, which is to, quote, to set a process going that is not related to anything, end quote. Consequently, the open call for the city's public lending institutions to submit a list of 10 objects is the main difference between Museum Circles and errata musicale's chance methodology. While Cage used chance to create his pool of objects, Duchamp used chance only as a method of selection. While the former opened his chord to include any object, the latter closed of outside possibilities by determining the notes and words that were used. In other words, Cage used chance to conduct an unpredictable process that would surprise, first of all, himself. And Duchamp, as a conceptual artist, used chance as a translation tool in turning his ideas to conceptual objects. Sophie Stevens rightfully crowns Duchamp as the inventor of what she calls conceptual music. In her essay, John Cage tuned into the redefinition of the musical field by Marcel Duchamp and the emergence of the conceptual music. Stevens states that through his compositions, Duchamp offered an experience in which the truth of music is no longer dependent on its on its acoustic dimension, but rather on its conceptual dimension. Music becomes an object that leads to listening as thought. Duchamp's music might be useless performance in any case, as he himself suggested, but from the epistemological stance, his compositions, similar to other objects he worked with, such as the urinal, should be valued for the ideas they hold. In other words, Duchamp, the composer, showed that music could function in another level besides sound, one in which it is not necessarily to be played. This observation is crucial to the understanding of Museum Circle as Cage's special adaptation of errata musicale conceptual sound, and accordingly supports the argument that Cage's composition confronts the role of the curator. However, I maintain that by using his own chance methodology, Cage managed to avoid this snare of imitation. Moreover, by transforming Duchamp's musical composition to a spatial composition, Cage managed to exceed simply being provocative and compose a process-based exhibition that all the offer to get yourself in such a state of confusion that you think that a sound is not something to hear, but rather something to look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Liora. We have about 9.5 minutes for questions and comments. If there's none, then I have a couple of yes.
This piece reminded me of work he did in 1988 in a German museum. I don't know if you're aware of that, where he worked with 800 young people and they rebroadcast the exhibition across Germany to, I can't remember how many stations along. And at the same time, it was like a circus as well. So I don't know if you're aware of that piece.
No, I'm not, and I would look into it. Thanks.
I can give you a link.
Yes, please do.
Thank you. Other comments, questions? Otherwise, I will go to my notes. I'm curious of how you see the difference between working as a composer and working as a curator. If you, I mean, the examples that you bring, and especially the way that Cage works is, for me at least, he's sort of curating the world. He's sort of curating the sounding world. But how do you see the difference between a composer and a curator?
Well, obviously, a curator and a composer, it's kind of a large definition, but maybe we can look at an exhibition and a musical work and try to compare between, compare between the two. And I think that while musical work is obviously time-based and the experience is through duration, an exhibition is something that is, for some reason, try to exhibit sound in the same way a visual object is displayed, meaning that it needs to be very straightforward, that it can't fade away in its mode of display, not in the mode of perception. And maybe the obvious example is the way audio work are presented with earphones, that you are hearing it now, and then when you go, it doesn't fade. It just, when you take it off, it's just ends. Or where sound works usually are presented in acoustical isolated rooms, and which is very much against to the nature of its material, right? It should flow, it should bleed to the other spaces, to the other room. But in a museum, most of the times it's displayed as though it's a visual object, meaning you're in this room and you're supposed to see it now or to hear it now. But when you go, elsewhere, if it's not intentional that you will hear it, then it isolated or blocked. And where in a musical work, there's this like sound comes and goes, and it can surround you from all around. I think that what I'm interested in is obviously not to look of variations of what Cage did and try to make variations of his work, or just to maybe think what does that even mean, and what's the possibilities of curating through sound or understanding a space through sound, but to visual objects, the display of visual objects.
As I understood your presentation, you in the end you sort of concluded that Duchamp's his aim was that music, or to try to develop a sort of music or a composition that doesn't need to be played.
Yes.
And then you talk about that music is somehow some kind of, it's a time-based phenomenon.
Yes, well, that's...
So that how do you see these two perspectives?
That's maybe the uniqueness or the beautiful of Duchamp's musical works, that you look at the score and you read the abstract that defines this score, and it becomes an object, it becomes a visual object. You don't necessarily need for it to be played. It stands for itself. Where musical work, if you look at the score, it's usually not enough, right? You need to hear it in order to have some kind of understanding of what you feel about it. Where with Duchamp's work, you read the history, the art history behind it, and you see the score, and it's more or less stands for itself, like any other visual object.
Yeah. And the last, any comments or questions? I'm just talking, but just the last question is about the notion of chant music, or chant composition. And you said that Cage wasn't interested in pulling notes out of a hat. He was more interested in choosing these chant operations based on listening, as I understood it.
Yeah, well, actually, Cage said that.
Yeah.
And yes, well, he used chants to create a process that would surprise, first of all, himself about, like, the outcome wasn't determined. And where with Cage, with Duchamp, sorry, he used chants as a mode of selection, in order to select the words from this in this work, in Erratum Musical. But he more or less, like it wasn't open to all kind of like it was very limited. And Cage's chance-based composition is always are even open to the possibilities of failure of not happening at all. And in Museum Circle, one of the instructions was not to do any follow-up. Like, you should send the invitation to all the public institutions that had a public collection, and if they wouldn't reply, or if this invitation would go to the junk mail, or then the walls could be empty, and that would also mean something. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.